In the dim half-light before dawn, a single grain of sand rests on carved stone unmoving. It has settled into a shallow groove left by a chisel hand that vanished thousands of years ago. The surface beneath it is cool, rough, and worn smooth by time, as if the stone itself has been breathing slowly, exhaling dust back into the desert. Around it everything is silent. No wind, no footsteps, only the faint presence of something ancient waiting. You're not here by accident. Long before maps, before dynasties, before names were etched into memory, a deeper rhythm began to turn. It is the same rhythm that guides dust into cracks, shadow into chambers, and questions into the human mind. You have been drawn here by a pulse older than history, older than Egypt itself, a cadence that does not belong to kings or priests, but to time-stone and forgetting. What if civilization is not a straight ascent from darkness into light, but a circle of memory and ash? What if knowledge rises, sinks and rises again, leaving only fragments behind? A footprint hardened into stone, a wall scraped clean, a tomb prepared but never used. What if the sand does not merely cover ruins, but protects them, sealing away things that were once too powerful, too disruptive, or too dangerous to remain in the open? Egypt is often remembered as eternal unchanging, carved in stone. Yet beneath that image lies another Egypt layered in shadow. An Egypt that chose what should be remembered and what must be erased. An Egypt where dust became an instrument, stone a veil, and silence a form of control. The sand remembers even when written. Memory fails, holding traces of an older world that still presses upward from below. So listen to the quiet. Feel the weight of ash and stone settling around you. Let the ancient rhythm slow your thoughts and loosen your sense of time. Stay with me. Let's drift a little deeper. The desert at night is not empty. It is full, in a way oceans are full dense with pressure layered with invisible weight. When the sun releases its hold, heat drains slowly from the sand, sinking downward grain by grain. The surface cools first, then the layers beneath follow like a long breath exhaled by the earth. Stone contracts, shadows lengthen. The air settles into stillness so complete it feels engineered, as if silence itself were part of the landscape's design. Beneath your feet the ground is not simply sand, it is a memory field. Quartz grains ground down from mountains that no longer exist. Feldspar weathered from plateaus, erased by time, fragments of shells that once rested at the bottom of ancient seas. Each step presses these remnants closer together. Each footprint is a brief compression of deep time, a moment where gravity reminds matter where it belongs. Gravity is memory. It pulls everything back toward what it once was. If you could kneel and press your palm into the surface, you would feel the difference between night sand and day sand. Night sand is cool, almost damp with retained cold, its texture tighter, less willing to flow. It resists the hand gently. This resistance is important. It is the Earth's way of holding itself together when the light is gone. In the darkness, cohesion matters more than movement. Things stay where they are meant to be. Above the sky opens without effort. Stars do not sparkle here. They burn steadily undisturbed by moisture or cloud. The Milky Way stretches across the black like a fracture line in stone, a reminder that even the heavens carry stress marks from formation. Light that left its source before the first Egyptian dynasties now reaches your eyes, crossing vacuum, time and silence without changing its intention. This is not metaphor. This is physics behaving patiently. The desert listens at night. Without wind, without animals, without human noise, sound collapses inward. Your breathing becomes audible. Your pulse becomes noticeable. The body remembers that it is a geological event too, a structure built from minerals, fluids and pressure. Bones are compressed rock. Blood is a moving solution. Skin is sediment, constantly shedding, constantly renewed. You're not separate from this place. You're a temporary arrangement of the same materials. Long before Egypt was dry, this land was something else entirely. Rivers braided across it. Forest rooted into soils now locked beneath dunes. The air carried moisture. The night smelled of vegetation instead of dust. but climates shift the way thoughts do, slowly at first, then all at once. When rainfall retreated, the land did not die. It hardened. It sealed itself. The desert is not absence. It is preservation. This is why the night matters. Heat hides detail. Light distracts. In the day, the desert dazzles and overwhelms, offering brightness instead of depth. At night, the land reveals its structure. Subtle slopes become visible. Ancient channels faintly reappear as tonal differences in sand. The earth relaxes enough to show where it has been bent, carved, and interrupted. Darkness is not concealment. Darkness is contrast. In the distance, stone rises from sand with deliberate indifference. Limestone plateaus, chalky and pale, still hold warmth hours after sunset. If you rest against one, you can feel it radiating the day back into the night, slow and steady. This is thermal memory. Rock remembers sunlight longer than air does. It releases it reluctantly, as if aware that cold will soon dominate again. Time behaves the same way. Every desert night is a negotiation between what was and what remains. Wind pauses. Erosion sleeps. Even decay slows, waiting for morning to resume its work. Erosion is time thinking, and at night time reflects instead of acting. The land is not being reshaped right now. It is being considered. This pause is not empty. It is preparatory. Beneath the visible surface, temperatures stabilize quickly. A meter down, the fluctuations vanish. Deeper still, the earth holds a constant coolness, a steady condition that does not care about day or night. This is why ancient structures endure underground. It is why buried stone survives when exposed stone crumbles. Stability is a form of protection, and depth is how the planet achieves it. Insects retreat. Reptiles find shelter. Life contracts inward, conserving energy, lowering its demands. The same principle applies to civilizations. When conditions change, societies either adapt outward or retreat inward. Egypt chose depth. It placed meaning below the surface. Tombs, chambers, tunnels, caches. The land itself encouraged this behavior. When the surface becomes hostile, the subsurface becomes sacred. Silence thickens as the night progresses. Even the faint hiss of shifting sand fades. The desert does not sleep the way living things do. It enters equilibrium. Forces balance. Pressures equalize. Nothing dramatic happens, and that is precisely when the most important processes are underway. Geological transformation does not announce itself. It accumulates quietly. Far below, bedrock holds scars from stress long resolved. Fault lines sealed, fractures mineralized, voids filled with calcite deposited drop by drop over tens of thousands of years. Water once moved here slowly, persistently, carving paths that no longer exist at the surface. These pathways are still present fossilized conduits waiting for pressure to return. The land remembers every flow. Night after night for millennia, the same cooling cycle repeated. The same contraction. The same stillness. Human generations rose and vanished within this rhythm, barely noticeable against it. Dynasties are brief thermal events. Climate epochs are the true measures of duration. The desert does not mark years, it marks conditions. Standing here, you're balanced between two immensities, above cosmic time measured in light years and stellar lifespans, below geological time measured in strata and isotopes. Human history occupies a thin layer between them, a dusting of activity on an otherwise ancient continuum. This perspective does not diminish humanity. It contextualizes it. As the night deepens, the cold sharpens slightly enough to be felt through fabric. Skin tightens, muscles relax. The body yields to the environment rather than resisting it. This yielding is not weakness. It is alignment. When systems align with their surroundings, they conserve energy. They endure longer. The desert rewards those who slow down. Details emerge only when the observer does not rush. A faint line of compacted sand reveals an old path. A subtle depression hints at buried stone. A difference in sound underfoot suggests a change in substrate. Attention becomes a form of excavation. This is the atmosphere Egypt rests in when no one is watching. Not the Egypt of monuments and sunlight, but the Egypt of cooling stone-sealed chambers and patient silence. This is the state in which things are hidden, not lost. The night does not erase. It holds. Here beneath the stars and above the buried layers, the land waits without urgency. It has time, and as you remain still within it, breathing in rhythm with the cooling earth, the boundary between present and past begins to soften. Not because something is about to happen, but because it already has countless times before. The night accepts you without ceremony. The sand settles, the stone cools, the atmosphere closes gently around all of it, and in this quiet equilibrium the surface prepares to give way to what lies beneath. Evidence does not arrive all at once. It accumulates the way sediment does, particle by particle, carried by forces too slow to notice in a single lifetime. In Egypt, the first layer is geological, not historical. Beneath the dunes lie ancient floodplains, compacted silts, and marine deposits that do not belong to a desert world. These materials speak quietly of long intervals when water ruled this land, when rainfall shaped valleys and vegetation softened the ground. The desert in this sense is a recent condition. Bore samples taken across the Nile Valley reveal alternating bands of wet and dry epochs, stacked like pages in a book no one reads anymore. Clay layers swell and shrink depending on moisture locking in chemical signatures of vanished climates. Pollen grains preserved in these layers tell of grasses, trees and wetlands that once thrived where sand now dominates. The Earth records its own history faithfully even when human memory fails to keep pace. Satellite imagery adds another layer, one visible only from far above. Beneath the sand, faint linear shadows trace the paths of extinct rivers, some wider than the modern Nile. These channels curve and branch with organic complexity, impossible to mistake for coincidence. They are the scars of hydrological systems that once fed settlements, moved nutrients and sustained life at a scale incompatible with today's aridity. Sand did not create these forms, it only buried them. Ground-penetrating radar confirms what the images suggest. At depths of several meters, reflective anomalies appear, where no natural dune structure should exist. Right angles, flat plains, sudden discontinuities in sediment. These signals do not announce what they are, only what they are not. They do not behave like random geology. They behave like interruptions. Places where something once occupied space before being deliberately covered. Chemical analysis of soil adds further weight. Elevated levels of phosphates, ash residues, and organic compounds cluster in zones far from the modern river. These are the byproducts of sustained human presence, food preparation, habitation waste. They do not drift far on their own. They accumulate where life remains in one place long enough to leave a chemical footprint. The desert has preserved these traces with unintended precision. Stone tools complicate the picture further. In regions now isolated and barren, archaeologists find lithic assemblages worn smooth by use-not transport. The edges speak of cutting plant fibers, processing hides, shaping wood. These are not the tools of transient hunters passing through a hostile environment. They belong to people who expected the land to provide, who lived within a system stable enough to support routine repetition and planning. Even the Nile itself holds evidence of a deeper story. Its current course is narrow compared to its ancient floodplain, which stretches far beyond the modern banks. Sediment cores show repeated episodes of massive flooding far more energetic than those recorded in dynastic history. These floods carried not just silt, but entire landscapes downstream, redistributing stone, soil, and memory. River behavior reflects climate pressure, not human preference. Fossilized shorelines etched into limestone plateaus confirm that sea levels once stood far higher than today. These terraces are not subtle. They are wide, continuous, and unmistakable. Marine shells embedded in rock far above the current coastline testify to an age when the Mediterranean pressed inland, reshaping the margins of Egypt itself. Water has claimed and released this land more than once, each time leaving a signature difficult to erase. The desert wind, often blamed for everything, is in fact a poor sculptor of deep structures. Wind abrades surfaces. It does not carve channels, flatten plains, or create stratified deposits. When explanations rely too heavily on aeolian processes, they grow thin. The land's deeper features demand heavier forces, sustained water flow tectonic stability, long-term biological activity. These forces belong to epochs, not events. Radiometric dating anchors. These observations in time, uranium series dating of cave deposits, optically stimulated luminescence of buried sands, and isotope ratios in fossil soils converge on a shared conclusion. Much of what lies beneath Egypt's desert formed under conditions profoundly different from today's. These are not marginal variations, they are regime shifts, climate states that persisted long enough to shape ecosystems, and by extension human behaviour. Animal remains reinforce this narrative. Fossils of hippos, crocodiles, and large grazing mammals appear in places now incapable of supporting them. Their presence implies standing water vegetation and stable food chains. These animals do not wander into deserts by accident. They belong to environments structured around abundance. Their bones are quiet witnesses to a land that once functioned very differently. Human remains, when found, often appear out of context with later cultural layers. Burials lacking dynastic markers, settlements without monumental architecture, traces of organisation without written record. These fragments resist easy classification. They do not fit neatly into the accepted sequence. Instead, they suggest long intervals of habitation that predate the stories Egypt later chose to tell about itself. Even architecture participates in the evidence, though it speaks indirectly. The earlier stone constructions rest on bedrock already weathered by water. Their builders understood load-bearing erosion patterns and material stress in ways that imply inherited knowledge. Stone does not forgive error easily. Techniques refined through trial alone would leave more failures behind. What remains suggests continuity rather than invention. Astronomical alignments add a final, subtle layer. Certain orientations correspond not to the sky as it appears today, but to configurations that existed thousands of years earlier shifted by precession. This implies observational traditions extending far back in time preserved through cultural transmission even as climates and landscapes changed. The sky, like the land, carries memory for those who learn how to read it. None of this evidence shouts. It does not demand belief. It simply accumulates patient and indifferent to interpretation. Like sediment settling at the bottom of still water, each piece rests atop the last, forming a record that grows harder to ignore as it thickens. Taken alone, each layer can be explained away. Together they begin to exert pressure. Pressure is how geology turns sand into stone. It is also how understanding forms. The weight of consistent converging data reshapes assumptions over time, not abruptly, gradually. The desert does not argue, it presents. And beneath its surface the evidence continues to wait unchanged by doubt, unmoved by debate holding its place in the long archive of the earth. Here the body relaxes into the rhythm of accumulation. Breath slows, thoughts stretch. The mind begins to accept that truth does not always arrive as revelation. Sometimes it arrives as repetition, as pattern, as the quiet insistence of facts that refuse to disappear. The sand may shift, but what lies beneath it remains. An anomaly is not a loud contradiction. It is a quiet discomfort in the data, a place where measurements technically function, yet meaning begins to thin. In Egypt, anomalies appear the way hairline fractures appear in stone subtle, at first easy to ignore unless pressure is applied. They emerge when evidence aligns too cleanly in most places, then suddenly refuses to do so in one specific zone, one structure, one date, one behaviour that does not belong. Consider erosion, a process so slow it teaches patience to anyone who studies it. Limestone weathers in predictable ways, wind etches softly, sand scours horizontally, rain cuts vertically. Yet across Egypt certain stone surfaces carry signatures that do not match the environment they exist in today. Rounded channels, smoothed concavities, deep undulating grooves appear where rainfall has been absent for thousands of years. These marks do not argue, they simply persist. The Sphinx enclosure is often mentioned, but it is not alone. Similar weathering patterns appear on bedrock foundations beneath temples, beneath causeways, beneath later constructions that reused older ground without questioning its shape. These surfaces were already old when the monuments were built on top of them. Stone remembers its first environment more clearly than its last. Once shaped, it does not forget. Chronology begins to strain here. Official timelines place Egypt's great stone culture firmly within a dry climatic phase. Yet the rocks beneath some of its most iconic structures speak of sustained water exposure, not occasional storms, not flash floods, long-term repeated flow. The kind that requires a different sky, a different rhythm of seasons, a different world entirely. Artifacts deepen the unease. Precision appears where it should not. Granite boxes cut with flatness. Tolerances measurable in fractions of a millimetre. Internal corners sharper than erosion allows. Surfaces polished to a reflectivity that demands either enormous labour or unfamiliar technique. Granite resists casual shaping. It punishes mistakes. And yet here it lies shaped, as if resistance were irrelevant. The anomaly is not that ancient people worked hard. That assumption explains nothing. The anomaly is consistency. Precision repeated across multiple objects, multiple sites, multiple dynasties without visible technological progression or failure states. In most human crafts, mistakes remain. Here they are conspicuously absent. The learning curve is missing. Tool marks complicate the picture further. Copper cannot cut granite cleanly without abrasives, and abrasives leave signatures. In some cases, these signatures are present. In others, they are not. Instead, surfaces display striations that curve overlap and terminate in ways inconsistent with hand-driven tools. These marks suggest motion that is continuous, controlled, and uniform. Motion that does not tire. Architecture adds another fracture. The earliest monumental constructions are often the most refined. Later periods reuse stones, simplify joints, accept imperfections. This reversal contradicts normal technological development, which tends to move from crude to precise. In Egypt, precision appears early, then gradually decays. This is not evolution, it is inheritance. Measurements of block weights and placement raise further questions. Some stones weigh more than modern cranes comfortably handle, yet they sit precisely aligned, fitted so tightly that a blade cannot pass between them. These are not symbolic placements. They are load-bearing decisions. Errors here would result in collapse. The structures stand because whoever designed them understood stress distribution and material limits intimately. Astronomy introduces another anomaly, quieter but persistent. Alignments lock onto cardinal directions with astonishing accuracy. Deviations measure in arc minutes, not degrees. This precision demands long-term observation, not guesswork. It requires instruments, reference points, and time, and yet the instruments that could produce such accuracy are largely absent from the archaeological record. Texts, when they exist, are unhelpful. They describe outcomes, not processes, rituals, not mechanics. The knowledge of how things were done seems deliberately unrecorded. This absence is itself anomalous. Complex societies tend to document techniques that matter. Here those techniques vanish, leaving only results behind. The anomaly grows sharper when comparing Egypt to contemporaneous cultures. Neighbouring civilizations with similar resources did not achieve comparable stonework. They did not align monuments with the same precision. They did not carve granite at this scale. Cultural diffusion cannot fully explain the gap. Something unique operated here briefly, intensely, then faded. Geology provides another angle. The bedrock beneath Egypt is stable, old, and largely unfractured. This stability makes large-scale stone construction feasible, but it also preserves evidence exceptionally well. If certain techniques had existed and then disappeared, the geological context would preserve their results long after the methods were forgotten. This is exactly what we observe. The Nile complicates things further. Its predictable flooding should encourage incremental development, not sudden leaps. Yet the archaeological record shows bursts of sophistication separated by long plateaus. Innovation appears suddenly fully formed, then stalls. This pattern resembles cultural memory being accessed rather than knowledge being invented. Human remains offer subtle hints. Skeletal evidence from some periods suggests physical stress patterns consistent with heavy labour. Other periods show less strain despite larger projects. This inconsistency suggests changing methods, not changing ambition. Bodies remember effort. When effort vanishes but results remain, questions arise. Even symbolism participates in the anomaly. Certain motifs appear fully developed with no clear antecedents. Sacred geometry embedded in architecture. proportional systems repeated across sites. These systems function mathematically whether or not they are named. Mathematics does not care who understands it. It only works. The desert itself reinforces the problem. Sand buries uniformly, does not select. Yet some structures vanish entirely while others remain exposed. This uneven preservation suggests human intervention layered atop natural processes. Choices were made about what to hide, what to dismantle, what to leave visible. Anomalies often arise from intention or accident. When anomalies accumulate, they begin to reshape the narrative space, not by offering a new story, but by weakening the old one's load-bearing walls. The accepted framework can still stand, but only with increasing reinforcement, increasing explanation, increasing dismissal of inconvenient details. This is how paradigms age. An anomaly is not proof of anything beyond itself. It does not declare origins. It does not name builders. It simply refuses to be absorbed cleanly. It remains a rough edge in an otherwise smooth account, and rough edges matter. In geology, fractures guide future breaks. In history, anomalies guide future questions. As the night deepens in the desert, temperature gradients continue their silent work. Stone contracts microscopically. Grains settle. Nothing dramatic occurs. Yet within this stillness, stress redistributes. The land adjusts. Anomalies in pressure eventually become movement. Given enough time, fractures propagate. The mind responds similarly. Faced with persistent irregularities, it either hardens into defense or softens into curiosity. To soften is not to abandon reason. It is to allow the data to breathe, to exist without immediate resolution. This state is uncomfortable, but it is fertile. Here beneath the stars, anomalies do not demand answers. They simply remain present like unfinished sentences carved into stone. They whisper that something does not quite belong, that the surface story is thinner than it appears. And in that whisper, the deeper descent continues, not towards certainty, but toward a more honest form of not knowing. The desert accepts anomalies easily. It has seen climates change, seas arrive, and leave mountains grind into dust. Human confusion is minor by comparison. The land does not rush to explain itself, it waits, and so do the questions embedded quietly beneath the sand patient as stone. Silence is not the absence of sound, it is the absence of record. In geology, silence appears as an unconformity, a missing layer where time passed without leaving a visible trace. In history, silence forms the same way. Not through destruction alone, but through omission, through decisions made quietly about what will not be carried forward. Egypt's deepest mystery does not lie in what remains, but in what is no longer there. When archaeologists catalogue Egypt's past, they work within a framework of continuity. Dynasties flow into one another, styles evolve, beliefs adapt. Yet within this flow are intervals that feel unnaturally smooth, as if disruption has been sanded away. Entire generations leave behind monuments but no voices. Techniques appear perfected, yet their origins are undocumented. Knowledge is present in outcome but absent in explanation. This is not decay, this is removal. Stone inscriptions tell part of the story by what they do not say. Walls that should be filled with text stand bare. Chambers carefully carved but never inscribed wait in permanent quiet. Where other cultures filled surfaces with names and boasts, Egypt often chose restraint. The silence was not random. It was spatially selective, temporally clustered, and thematically consistent. Certain subjects simply do not survive. Medical knowledge is one of them. The physical evidence of advanced treatment exists in bone and tissue, yet the written manuals that should accompany such practice are fragmentary or missing entirely. Techniques that require precise anatomical understanding leave no detailed textual footprint. The hands knew what the words refused to record. This kind of silence suggests intention rather than loss. The same pattern appears in engineering. The how is absent. Blocks are placed, joints are sealed, chambers are locked with mechanical certainty, but instructions are nowhere to be found. In other cultures, such knowledge would be celebrated, transmitted, expanded. Here it vanishes between generations. Silence becomes a form of containment. Burials amplify the quiet. Tombs prepared, but never used. Bodies removed without trace. Graves lacking names. Others reused altered stripped of identity. The dead are present yet unnamed, or named yet missing. This inversion unsettles because burial practices are usually among the most conservative cultural elements. When they fracture, something fundamental has shifted. The desert collaborates in this erasure. Sand moves without memory, covering entrances, smoothing edges, equalizing surfaces. It does not discriminate between what was sacred and what was mundane. Once buried, everything becomes anonymous. Egypt learned to work with this property using the land itself as an archive that could be sealed without burning, without violence, without visible rupture. Historical records mirror this geological silence. King lists skip reigns. Chronologies compress decades into lines. Certain periods appear orderly despite evidence of stress. Famine, migration, and upheaval leave few direct descriptions. Instead, stability is asserted repeatedly, almost defensively. The louder the claim of the order, the more telling the absence beneath it. Language itself participates. Titles appear once, then never again. Roles implied by artifacts lack corresponding names. Concepts essential to function are referenced obliquely or not at all. When language retreats, it leaves behind artifacts that behave like echoes without voices. Meaning persists, but context dissolves. Even myths reflect this pattern. Stories speak of forgotten ages of gods who withdrew of knowledge sealed away. These narratives are not histories, but they are not accidental either. Myth often fills gaps left by censored memory. It preserves emotional truth when factual detail becomes dangerous to retain. Silence and story coexist uneasily, each compensating for the other. The silence is not uniform. It clusters around transitions. The end of the Old Kingdom, the upheaval of the Amarna period, the decline of the New Kingdom. Each interval is marked by political stress, environmental pressure, or religious reorientation, and in each record's thin. The pen lifts, the chisel pauses, memory contracts. This contraction is not failure, it is strategy. Systems under threat simplify. They conserve energy. They reduce complexity to survive. In such moments, knowledge becomes a liability if it destabilizes authority or challenges coherence. Silence then is not ignorance, it is governance. The earth offers an analogy. When pressure builds, deep underground rocks do not always fracture immediately. Sometimes they flow, sometimes they recrystallize, sometimes they absorb stress by changing structure internally, leaving no obvious sign at the surface. The silence in Egypt's record functions the same way. Stress is present. Adjustment occurs. The surface remains deceptively smooth. Modern attempts to fill these gaps often mistake silence for absence. But absence leaves randomness, silence leaves shape. The missing parts of Egypt's story are not chaotic. They form outlines, boundaries, edges that hint at what once occupied them. Silence is a negative space that reveals form through contrast. At night, the desert expresses this most clearly. Sound does not vanish. It is absorbed. Footsteps dull quickly. Voices fall inward. Even wind seems hesitant. The land has learned to hold energy without releasing it. In this environment, silence is not empty. It is dense. The human mind responds to this density by slowing. Questions soften. Certainty loosens. One begins to sense that understanding does not always arrive through accumulation. Sometimes it arrives through subtraction, through noticing what is consistently not there. Egypt's silence invites this mode of listening, not for answers but for patterns of withholding. The same way a sealed chamber suggests importance without revealing contents, the gaps in the record suggest deliberate choice. Something was deemed too volatile, too powerful, or too disruptive to remain accessible. Whether that something was technological, medical, spiritual, or social matters less than the fact of its removal. The silence itself becomes the evidence. A civilization that went to extraordinary lengths to preserve stone and text does not forget accidentally. When it forgets, it does so carefully. The desert night accepts this silence as natural. It does not attempt to fill it. It allows the quiet to remain intact, unbroken by explanation. And in doing so, it teaches a deeper form of attention, one that listens not for sound but for absence. Here, surrounded by cooling stone and settling sand, the gaps feel less like loss and more like intention. The land does not rush to reveal what it has been asked to hold. It waits. And in that waiting, the silence becomes part of the story, not as an ending, but as a threshold. A forgotten epoch does not vanish the way a city burns. It fades the way coastlines retreat grain by grain, tide by tide, until memory itself can no longer say where land once ended and sea once began. In Egypt, this lost age does not announce itself with ruins or inscriptions. It announces itself through alignment, through continuity without origin, through systems that appear complete the moment they enter the record, as if inherited rather than invented. To imagine this epoch, one must first release the image of Egypt as a beginning. Dynastic Egypt is not the first chapter. It is a chapter written after something else had already learned how to build, measure, align, and preserve. The stones do not lie about this. They rest on foundations that were already ancient when names were carved into them. The land beneath the temples carries the wear of water, not wind, and water belongs to a different world. This earlier Egypt existed under a different sky. Not metaphorically, but astronomically. Precession slowly shifts the stars, altering where constellations rise and set over thousands of years. Certain orientations in Egypt align not with the heavens of 3000 BCE, but with skies thousands of years older. These alignments were not adjusted, they were preserved. This suggests reverence, not ignorance, a decision to honour a prior order rather than overwrite it. The climate of this forgotten epoch was forgiving. Rainfall returned seasonally. Lakes dotted the Sahara. Rivers braided across plains now locked beneath dunes. Vegetation stabilized soils, allowing structures to endure without constant repair. In such conditions, long-term planning becomes possible. Stonework becomes sensible. Precision becomes worthwhile. Civilization breathes slowly when the land supports it. Human presence during this time was not tentative. It was established. Tools were not experimental. They were refined. Social organization did not revolve around survival alone, but around continuity. People built with an expectation that what they made would be used, revisited, remembered. This expectation changes architecture. It changes ritual. It changes how knowledge is handled. Knowledge in this epoch appears to have been practical, observational, and deeply integrated with natural systems. Astronomy was not abstract. It regulated agriculture, navigation, and ceremony. Geology was not named, but it was understood through stone selection, quarrying choices, and structural design. Medicine was empirical, drawn from plant chemistry, and anatomical familiarity developed over generations. This is why the later erasures feel surgical. When dynastic Egypt encountered the remnants of this earlier world, it did not simply build over them, it curated them. It reused stones, but not always knowledge. It adopted forms, but not always methods. It preserved alignments, but obscured origins. The forgotten epoch became a foundation without attribution. Myth stepped in where history retreated. Stories of gods arriving fully formed, bringing order, measurement, and law. Tales of divine architects and healers. These myths are not records, but they are not random. They encode the shock of inheritance, the feeling of receiving a system too complete to explain from scratch. When humans inherit complexity, they often externalize its origin. The forgotten epoch did not end in triumph. It ended quietly. Climate shifted. Rain patterns destabilized. Water withdrew. Systems dependent on abundance strained. The land hardened. Adaptation became necessary. Some knowledge remained useful, some became dangerous, some no longer applied. The response was not uniform across regions or generations. As conditions worsened, mobility increased, settlements fragmented, centralized systems lost coherence. Knowledge transmission became selective. What could be carried forward was simplified. What could not be maintained was sealed, buried, or abandoned. The land itself assisted in this process, covering structures, preserving them without maintaining them. This is where the desert began its long role as archivist. Sand filled low places first, wind smoothed edges, organic materials decayed, Stone remained. The forgotten epoch slipped beneath the surface not because it failed, but because it no longer fit the environment that replaced it. Evolution does not mourn what it outgrows. Later civilizations encountered this buried world as inheritance without instructions. They recognized its power but not its full context. Some aspects were revered, others feared. When knowledge outpaces comprehension, it destabilizes authority. Control then replaces understanding. What cannot be integrated must be managed. The dynastic system that followed was brilliant, but it was also defensive. It organized memory carefully. It standardized ritual. It emphasized continuity while quietly narrowing the range of permissible knowledge. The forgotten epoch became a source of legitimacy without being a subject of study. Its traces were useful. Its story was not. This explains the paradox of Egypt's confidence and caution. The civilization knew it stood on something older. It knew its roots were deep. But it also knew that revisiting those roots too openly could fracture the present. So it chose to remember selectively, to honor form while suppressing origin. The forgotten epoch lives on in proportions, in alignments, in techniques that appear suddenly and then vanish. It lives in the body knowledge passed hand to hand rather than word to word. It lives in stone that fits too well in cuts that assume familiarity with material behavior in systems that do not explain themselves. At night, this earlier world feels closer. The desert cools, the air thickens, the stars reclaim dominance. One can almost sense the land before dryness, before scarcity, before urgency reshaped human priorities. The silence becomes less empty and more expectant, as if something beneath the sand is still listening. Geology teaches that no layer is truly lost. It is compressed, transformed, or buried, but its influence persists. The forgotten epoch exerts pressure upward through everything that followed it. Even in absence, it shapes what came after. Absence is not neutral. It bends the path of memory. To accept this is not to romanticize the past. It is to recognize that civilizations like ecosystems have deep roots and shallow expressions. What we see at the surface is often the least stable part. The deeper structures endure unseen, informing everything built above them. The forgotten epoch does not ask to be recovered fully. It does not demand monuments or names. It asks only to be acknowledged as a phase of human experience shaped by conditions no longer present. A time when the land allowed certain forms of knowledge to exist naturally without fear. As the night stretches on, the desert holds this memory without urgency. Sand does not rush to reveal what it covers. It understands cycles. It knows that what sinks may rise again under different pressures. And so, the forgotten epoch remains, where it has always been, beneath the surface, neither dead nor alive, simply waiting within the long patience of stone. A reset is rarely an explosion. In Earth systems, it is more often a release, a slow exhale after long tension. Pressure builds invisibly for centuries, then reorganizes conditions without asking permission. In Egypt's deep past, the reset did not arrive as a single catastrophe remembered in story. It arrived as a sequence of adjustments. Climate drifting out of alignment, water withdrawing, rhythms breaking apart. The land did not end. It changed its rules. Geology records this kind of reset with elegance. Lake beds dry and harden into salt flats. River channels shrink, then fracture into isolated pools. Soils lose cohesion as vegetation retreats, becoming mobile under wind. These changes do not announce collapse. They announce transition. Systems that once reinforced each other begin to decouple. Stability gives way to variability. Predictability dissolves. The Sahara did not become a desert overnight. It pulsed. Wet phases returned briefly, then failed. Each return raised hope. Each failure taught restraint. Human communities living through this oscillation adapted in stages, shifting from permanence to mobility, from abundance to management. The reset was not a fall from greatness. It was a narrowing of options. In such moments, knowledge becomes heavier. Techniques developed under one climate may become dangerous under another. Irrigation practices fail when rivers no longer behave. Architectural assumptions collapse when foundations dry and crack. Medical knowledge shifts as diets change and diseases migrate. What once healed may now harm. The earth does not judge this. It simply enforces consequence. The forgotten epoch did not disappear because it was flawed. It disappeared because it was no longer compatible. The reset filtered knowledge the way pressure filters minerals, allowing some structures to survive while transforming or dissolving others. What remained useful was carried forward. What destabilized the new order was buried. This is why resets feel intentional in hindsight. Patterns of erasure cluster around periods of environmental stress. But these are not conspiracies in the human sense. They are survival responses. When conditions tighten, systems simplify. Complexity becomes risk. Silence becomes safety. The reset reshaped Egypt's relationship with depth. What had once been open became enclosed. What had once been practiced openly became ritualized. What had once been transmitted freely became restricted. The land itself encouraged this movement inward. As the surface grew hostile, the subsurface offered stability. Tombs deepened. Storage moved underground. Knowledge followed. Stone architecture changed accordingly. Earlier structures emphasized integration with landscape. Later ones emphasized insulation from it. Thick walls, narrow passages, sealed chambers. These are not aesthetic choices alone. They are environmental strategies. The reset turned builders into conservators. Human memory adjusted too. Long narratives fragmented into symbols. Techniques became sacred gestures. Processes were replaced by mythic shorthand. When continuity breaks, meaning compresses. Stories become denser, less explanatory, more protective. Myth is not ignorance. It is compressed memory under pressure. The Nile remained, but its behavior shifted. Floods became less predictable. Sediment loads altered soil chemistry. Agricultural calendars tightened. Control systems intensified. Central authority grew more rigid, not from ambition but necessity. The reset rewarded coordination and punished deviation. In this environment, inherited knowledge posed a dilemma. Some of it still worked. Some of it no longer did. Some of it worked too well, offering possibilities that threatened fragile equilibrium. When systems are near failure, innovation can be as dangerous as stagnation. Resets favor caution. Thus, Egypt's remarkable continuity after climatic stress is not evidence of stagnation. It is evidence of successful adaptation. The civilization did not cling blindly to the past. It curated it. It selected what could survive the new conditions and sealed away what could not. Geology offers a parallel in metamorphic rock. Under heat and pressure, minerals realign. Original structures vanish. New ones emerge, often stronger, sometimes simpler. The rock is not destroyed. It is reset. Its history remains encoded, but only specialists can read it. Human societies undergo the same transformation. The reset did not erase Egypt's deep knowledge. It transformed it into something harder to access, embedded in ritual architecture and silence. This transformation preserves stability at the cost of transparency. Night in the desert feels like a reset enacted daily. Heat drains, activity slows, systems recalibrate. The land becomes less about motion and more about balance. Each night rehearses the ancient transition, reminding the surface that equilibrium matters more than expression. Under starlight, the earth releases energy accumulated during the day. The release is gentle, almost tender. No cracks form, no alarms sound, yet everything adjusts. This is how resets prefer to work quietly, leaving little for history to dramatize. The reset also changed how time was perceived. Long cycles replaced linear expectation. Repetition became sacred. Return mattered more than progress. Calendars aligned with celestial rhythms that promised predictability when terrestrial patterns failed. Sky became anchor when land became unreliable. This shift explains the intensity of Egypt's astronomical focus after environmental change. When Earth destabilizes, attention lifts upward. The sky offers consistency across millennia. Stars do not flood, constellations do not dry up. Aligning with them restores a sense of order that climate no longer provides. The reset did not make Egypt smaller. It made it deeper. Knowledge went underground literally and metaphorically. Structures gained layers. Rituals gained thresholds. Access required initiation. Complexity remained, but it was hidden behind formality. This depth is why Egypt feels timeless. What we see is not raw creativity, but refined survival. The civilization learned how to endure by reducing exposure, by compressing meaning, by sealing what could fracture under pressure. Endurance is a form of intelligence. The reset also introduced a new kind of forgetting. Not the loss of information, but the loss of context. Practices survived without explanation. Alignments remained without origin stories. Techniques were repeated without understanding why they worked. This is not decay, it is fossilization. Fossils are not mistakes, they are records of life adapted to past conditions, preserved when those conditions vanished. Egypt's deep knowledge became fossilized within its own culture, functional, but mute-effective, but silent. This silence was protective. It allowed the civilization to move forward without reopening vulnerabilities tied to past abundance. It prevented dangerous nostalgia. It kept attention focused on maintaining balance under new constraints. As centuries passed, the reset became normalized. Later generations inherited stability without remembering instability. The reasons for caution faded. Only the structures remained. This is why anomalies appear later unexplained by contemporary logic. They belong to a different environmental conversation. The reset did not end Egypt's story, it shaped its character. It taught restraint, repetition, and reverence for systems larger than human will. It turned a culture outwardly monumental and inwardly conservative. Stone endured, words thinned. In the quiet of the desert night, this ancient adjustment still resonates. Cooling air settles, sand stabilizes. The land holds its shape by letting go of excess energy. Reset is not destruction, it is recalibration. And as the earth completes this nightly release, the mind follows. Tension eases. The need for resolution softens. One begins to understand that survival does not always look like progress. Sometimes it looks like stillness depth, and the careful management of what is allowed to remain visible. The reset is not behind us. It is a pattern the earth repeats whenever conditions demand it. Egypt learned this early. It adjusted accordingly. And in doing so, it left behind a civilization that feels both ancient and strangely prepared, as if it had already practiced living after the world changed. An echo is not the original sound. It is what remains after the source has already moved on. In the desert, echoes do not bounce the way they do in stone chambers or mountain valleys. They sink. Sound disperses into sand absorbed grain by grain until only the suggestion of vibration remains. Egypt's past behaves the same way. What we encounter is not the event itself, but its residue still faintly resonant beneath the present. The echo of the forgotten epoch persists first in the human body. Biology carries memory more faithfully than language ever could. Skeletal structures, metabolic pathways, even instinctive responses to heat, light, and scarcity reveal long adaptation to environments that no longer exist. Humans who settled along the Nile carried with them behaviors refined in wetter worlds, habits shaped by abundance and seasonal rhythm rather than constant aridity. Agricultural practices reflect this inheritance. Crop cycles assume predictability. Storage systems assume surplus. Ritual calendars assume return. These assumptions did not originate in a desert. They belong to a landscape where rain arrived reliably enough to build expectation. Even after conditions changed, the behavior remained adjusted but not erased. The echo lived on in practice long after its environmental cause vanished. Architecture speaks with the same delayed voice. Proportions repeat across structures separated by centuries. Ratios appear without explanation. Orientation preferences persist even when their original astronomical context no longer applies perfectly. Builders followed rules they did not invent because those rules had proven durable. An echo does not ask why, it only insists on repetition. Stone corridors guide movement instinctively. Narrowing passages slow the body. High ceilings invite stillness. These design choices shape behavior without instruction. The body responds before the mind does. This is memory encoded, spatially knowledge transferred without words. The echo becomes environment. Ritual preserves another layer. Gestures performed without clear origin. Words repeated without translation movements enacted because they have always been enacted. Over time, meaning shifts from explanation to effect. If a ritual produces stability, it survives. Its rationale becomes irrelevant. The echo remains functional even when its story dissolves. Language itself carries fossilized structures. Certain metaphors recur across eras, linking earth, sky, and body in consistent patterns. The land is spoken of as living, the ski as ordering, the heart as weighing. These associations predate formal theology. They arise from long intimacy with natural cycles when survival depended on reading subtle cues in environment and body alike. The echo also appears in absence. Gaps in the record repeat predictably. Certain techniques vanish together. Certain questions remain unasked across generations. This coordinated forgetting is not random. It reflects inherited caution, a cultural memory of instability that no longer needs to be consciously recalled to remain effective. Music offers a quiet parallel. Rhythms used in ceremonial context often mirror natural cycles: heartbeat, walking, pace, seasonal return. These patterns are not taught academically. They are felt. The echo of an older world pulses through them, grounding participants in something larger than the immediate moment. Genetics whispers the same story. Adaptations to diet, to sunlight, to water availability persist long after environments change. Populations carry the imprint of former conditions in their physiology. The body does not forget quickly. It adapts, but it remembers. Even the layout of settlements reflects inherited logic. Villages orient toward water sources long dried. Pathways follow contours shaped by flows no longer present. Movement patterns persist until disrupted forcefully. The echo guides the feet even when the mind no longer knows why. At night, these echoes feel closer. The desert cools and sensory input narrows. Without visual distractions, subtle patterns emerge. One becomes aware of alignment of proportion of the way space seems to guide attention. The land does not speak, but it hums faintly with accumulated intention. The echo is strongest where continuity was least interrupted. In rural practices, in informal knowledge passed through hands rather than texts in habits too ordinary to document. These domains change slowly. They resist reform. They preserve deep time more effectively than institutions. This persistence can be mistaken for stagnation. It is not. It is compression. When systems endure repeated stress, they retain only what continues to function. The echo is a record of what survives selection across millennia, refined by environment rather than ideology. Modern observers often search for lost technologies or secret doctrines, but the echo suggests something subtler. What endured was not machinery or formula but orientation, a way of relating to land, sky and time that proved resilient under change. This orientation does not announce itself. It operates quietly. The echo also carries warning. Patterns that repeat do so because conditions that produced them tend to return. Cycles imprint behavior. When water withdrew, once societies learned to conserve. When abundance returned, briefly caution remained. Memory outlived circumstance. This is why Egypt's later rigidity should not be dismissed as conservatism alone. It reflects inherited awareness that conditions can shift abruptly. Flexibility exists within strict frameworks. Stability is maintained through repetition. Innovation is filtered carefully. The echo shapes aesthetics too. Preferences for symmetry, balance, and alignment reflect long engagement with natural systems that reward equilibrium. These preferences feel instinctive because they are. They arise from survival patterns encoded over generations. Even fear echoes. Anxiety around disorder, chaos, and uncontained forces appears repeatedly in iconography and myth. These fears are not abstract. They are inherited responses to real instability experienced long ago. The echo remembers threat without needing to name it. The desert amplifies this effect. Its vastness strips away context, leaving only structure. In such an environment, echoes linger longer. There is little noise to mask them. One can sense repetition in the land itself, dunes forming and reforming, in familiar patterns under shifting winds. In geology, echoes appear as reactivated faults, stress lines that reopen under new pressure. The Earth remembers where it once broke. Human systems do the same. Crises reactivate old patterns, inherited responses embedded deep within culture. Egypt's echoes surfaced whenever stress returned. Certain rituals intensified. Certain architectural forms reappeared. Certain silences deepened. These responses were not invented anew. They were remembered implicitly. The echo does not offer clarity, it offers familiarity, a sense that something has happened before even if no record survives. This familiarity can comfort or unsettle depending on how it is received. It invites recognition rather than explanation. In the quiet of the night, the body responds to this recognition by relaxing. There is relief in repetition. Cycles reassure. Knowing that change follows pattern reduces fear. The echo teaches that nothing emerges from nothing. Everything carries precedent. As you remain still listening not for sound but for resonance, the boundaries between past and present soften further. The echo does not demand attention. It simply persists like a low-frequency vibration beneath conscious thought. Egypt's older world is not gone. It hums quietly through architecture, ritual, habit, and instinct. It does not need to be resurrected to matter. It already shapes what exists. The desert holds this hum effortlessly. Sand absorbs, but it does not erase vibration entirely. It diffuses, it spreads it across time, and in that diffusion the echo becomes less a message and more a presence. Here beneath the stars and above buried layers, the echo continues its slow work. Not teaching, not warning, simply reminding. What once existed still influences what follows. The sound has faded, but the resonance remains. A pattern is not something that announces itself. It does not arrive with revelation or certainty. It forms slowly the way sediment settles in still water layer upon layer until shape emerges without effort. In Egypt, the pattern beneath the sand is not hidden because it is secret. It is hidden because it unfolds across spans of time the human mind rarely holds at once. When individual events are isolated, history appears chaotic. Dynasties rise and fall. Monuments are built, looted, repurposed. Rituals shift. Names vanish. But when these events are allowed to rest together without urgency, a rhythm begins to surface. The same movements repeat under different masks. The same responses return when conditions align. Egypt does not progress forward so much as it circles familiar ground. The Earth itself insists on this perspective. Geological cycles ignore narrative. Rivers migrate, return, and migrate again. Climates oscillate between abundance and scarcity. Landscapes do not improve, they adjust. Human systems built within these landscapes inherit that same oscillation. Stability is never permanent. Collapse is never final. Both are phases within a longer motion. In Egypt, periods of extraordinary capability do not cluster during peace. They appear during strain. When environmental pressure increases, when political coherence weakens, when belief systems fracture, technical and organizational sophistication intensifies. This is not paradox. It is pattern. Crisis draws buried knowledge to the surface. When pressure eases, that knowledge recedes. Techniques disappear. Records thin. Ritual replaces explanation. The civilization exhales. This is not loss. It is regulation. Knowledge is treated as something that must be managed, not endlessly expanded. Too much exposure destabilizes systems already under stress. This movement repeats with remarkable consistency. The Old Kingdom displays architectural precision that later periods struggle to replicate. The Middle Kingdom refines administrative and medical systems during political fragmentation. The New Kingdom unleashes engineering complexity amid religious upheaval. Each surge corresponds not to innovation, but to necessity. Once necessity fades, silence returns. The pattern closes. What was revealed is concealed again, not out of ignorance, but out of caution. Systems that survive long enough learn restraint. Egypt learned it early. Architecture preserves this rhythm in stone. Monumental forms emphasize permanence, but their construction history reveals bursts rather than steady refinement. Precision appears fully formed, then degrades. This reversal defies linear models but aligns perfectly with cyclical response. The best work is done when it must be done. The reuse of older materials is not merely economic, it is symbolic of recurrence. Stones from earlier phases are incorporated into later structures, carrying proportions and alignments forward. The past is not discarded. It is folded inward, becoming part of the present without explanation. Religion mirrors this containment. Belief systems oscillate between rigidity and experimentation. At times, the pantheon is fixed and hierarchical. At others, it becomes fluid, hybridized, unstable. These shifts align with broader stress patterns. Theology adapts to preserve coherence, not truth. Myth functions as a stabilizer within this cycle. It compresses complex memory into narrative forms that can survive long periods of silence. When explanation becomes dangerous or unnecessary, myth carries emotional and structural continuity. It allows knowledge to persist without clarity. The pattern also governs erasure. Names are removed, texts are chiseled away, practices disappear from record. These acts cluster during the same stress windows as technical surges. Erasure is not arbitrary, it is synchronized. Silence follows expression as reliably as night follows day. This synchronization is the clearest sign of pattern. Random loss produces disorder. Egypt's losses produce coherence. The same domains are erased repeatedly. Medical knowledge, engineering methods, certain ritual practices. The consistency reveals intent shaped by repetition. Environmental cycles provide the underlying tempo. As the Sahara dried wet faces returned briefly then failed. Each oscillation forced recalibration. Societies that survived learned to expect return without permanence. This expectation reshaped worldview. History became cyclical rather than directional. The Nile reinforced this mentality. Its flood did not promise progress, it promised repetition. Agriculture depended on return, not growth. Time was measured by cycles, not milestones. In such a framework, linear narratives lose relevance. Modern interpretations often misread this. They search for origins, inventors, and first appearances. But the pattern resists such questions. What matters is not when something began, but when it returned. Knowledge resurfaced because conditions demanded it, not because someone invented it anew. This explains why Egypt appears both ancient and advanced, conservative and innovative. These are not contradictions, they are expressions of the same pattern at different points in the cycle. Stability demands conservatism. Crisis demands innovation. The civilization oscillated between the two without abandoning either. The pattern extends into social structure. Authority centralizes during uncertainty, decentralizes during calm. Priesthoods tighten control over knowledge when belief systems fragment. Flexibility increases when cohesion returns. These movements repeat without needing to be consciously planned. Even art reflects this rhythm. Periods of formal rigidity alternate with bursts of experimentation. Styles crystallize, then dissolve. Symbolism grows dense, then simplifies. Aesthetic cycles follow the same pressure-response dynamic as engineering and ritual. Silence within this pattern is not emptiness, it is dormancy. Like seeds waiting for rain, certain forms of knowledge remain buried until conditions allow growth. Burial protects potential. Exposure risks destruction. The desert itself embodies this logic. Sand covers without crushing. It preserves by isolating. Structures buried beneath dunes are not erased. They are paused. The land enforces the same pattern the culture adopted consciously. Night in the desert offers a daily rehearsal of this motion. Heat dissipates. Activity slows. Systems reset. Morning will come not because something improved, but because cycles continue. The body responds instinctively, easing into rest without anxiety. This is why the pattern feels calming when understood. It removes the urgency to explain everything immediately. It allows questions to exist without answers. It frames uncertainty as temporary rather than threatening. Egypt's buried world fits naturally into this framework. It is not a missing chapter waiting to be recovered fully. It is a phase that completed its cycle and withdrew, Its influence remains not as instruction but as orientation. Recognizing the pattern alters how evidence is perceived. Anomalies cease to be disruptions. They become markers of phase transition. Silence becomes as informative as inscription. Absence gains shape. The pattern also dissolves the need for singular catastrophe narratives. Change did not arrive once. It arrived repeatedly. Each reset adjusted the system slightly differently. The result was not collapse, but endurance. Modern minds struggle with this because they are trained to expect novelty. Progress is assumed. Decline is feared. Cycles offer neither comfort nor alarm. They offer continuity without promise, yet continuity is precisely what Egypt achieved. By honouring pattern over progress, it survived conditions that erased less adaptive cultures. Longevity became its greatest achievement, even if it required surrendering transparency. As the night deepens further, thought begins to slow into repetition. Breath aligns with rhythm. Attention drifts from conclusion toward presence. The pattern is no longer an abstract concept. It is felt. Stone cools, sand settles. The land resumes its long oscillation. Beneath it all, beneath monuments and erasures alike, the pattern continues unbroken. It does not care to be proven. It does not require belief. It simply persists, repeating quietly, waiting for pressure to call it forward again, just as it always has. Warnings rarely arrive as commands. The earth does not speak in imperatives or deadlines. It whispers through gradients, through small deviations that seem harmless when viewed alone. In Egypt's deep past, the warning was never a single event etched into memory. It was a pattern of signals accumulating slowly the way pressure builds along a fault line without producing an earthquake. The land began to speak first long before societies understood what it was saying. Climate is the most patient messenger. Rainfall does not vanish abruptly. It hesitates, falters, returns unevenly, then withdraws again. In the regions that would become Egypt's deserts, lakes shrank by margins small enough to ignore for generations. Shorelines retreated quietly. Vegetation thinned almost politely. Each shift could be explained away as temporary a bad season, an unlucky decade. Warnings embedded in gradual change are the easiest to dismiss. The Nile offered its own signals. Flood levels varied subtly, sometimes arriving late, sometimes too early, sometimes carrying less silt than expected. These were not disasters. They were irregularities. But irregularity is the language of warning. Agricultural systems built on predictability feel stressed long before collapse occurs. Crops survive, but margins tighten. Storage becomes essential. Ritual calendars grow more elaborate not from faith alone, but from anxiety. Stone also responded. Bedrock exposed to changing moisture regimes cracked differently. Foundations settled unevenly. Structures designed for one climate began to behave strangely under another. Doors jammed, walls shifted by fractions too small to measure without attention. These were not failures, they were hints. The earth adjusts its posture before it breaks. Human bodies registered the warning as well. Skeletal remains show shifts in diet, in workload, in disease patterns. Nutritional stress appears intermittently, not as famine, but as subtle deficiency. Bones record this without commentary. Teeth carry traces of changing food sources. Health adapts before culture admits it must. The warning extended into the sky. Astronomical observations, once stable anchors of timekeeping, began to drift against seasonal markers. Stars rose where they were not expected. Alignment slipped slowly out of phase with agricultural reality. The heavens themselves did not change abruptly, but human reliance on celestial regularity exposed the growing mismatch between sky-based calendars and earth-based conditions. These discrepancies did not go unnoticed. They could not. Egypt's survival depended on reading the land accurately, but recognizing a warning is different from acting on it. Early responses tend to be conservative. Ritual intensifies. Authority centralizes. Systems tighten control in an effort to preserve stability. This is a natural reaction, not a flaw. The warning also appeared in social tension. Competition over resources increased quietly. Local power centers gained influence as central guarantees weakened. Administrative complexity rose as systems attempted to manage uncertainty through regulation. These measures work temporarily. They buy time, but time is all warnings ever offer. What is striking is that Egypt responded to these signals not with panic but with preparation. Knowledge was not discarded. It was reorganized. Certain practices were emphasized. Others were restricted. Medical experimentation increased. Engineering solutions became more precise. Storage systems deepened. Architecture grew heavier, more insulated, more inward-facing. The civilization leaned into control as conditions destabilized. Warnings do not demand immediate action. They invite calibration. Egypt calibrated carefully. It refined techniques that could buffer variability. It developed methods of preservation, containment, and sealing. These were not symbolic gestures. They were functional responses to uncertainty. When the surface becomes unreliable, depth becomes valuable. Ritual animals, specialized burials, sealed chambers, and controlled knowledge systems emerge during these warning phases. They are not signs of superstition. They are indicators of heightened sensitivity to instability. When systems perceive threat they cannot fully explain, they encode response into behavior rather than theory. The warning was not that Egypt would fall. It was that the conditions supporting a certain way of living were ending. This distinction matters. Collapse is dramatic. Transition is quiet. Egypt chose transition. It allowed certain possibilities to close while preserving others underground both literally and metaphorically. Geology offers a precise analogy. Before a major environmental shift, ecosystems reorganize. Species migrate. Niches contract. Diversity decreases temporarily as systems simplify. This simplification is not extinction. It is adaptation. Egypt's cultural narrowing follows the same logic. Silence deepens during warning phases. Not because there is nothing to say, but because saying too much destabilizes fragile equilibrium. Knowledge becomes dangerous when conditions are volatile. Control becomes a survival strategy. The warning taught Egypt when to speak and when to remain quiet. Night magnifies this understanding. In darkness, sensory input reduces. Subtle changes become easier to notice. A drop in temperature, a shift in wind, a faint vibration in stone. Warnings are always more audible when noise subsides. The desert night trained attention toward these subtleties. Over generations, the warning transformed from signal into memory. Even after conditions stabilized temporarily, caution remained. Systems designed during instability became standard practice. What began as response hardened into tradition. The warning outlived its immediate cause. This persistence explains why later periods appear overly rigid or secretive. They are not reacting to present danger. They are honoring inherited caution. Memory encoded in structure does not fade easily. The Earth remembers stress long after it has passed. Cultures do too. The warning also shaped what Egypt chose not to explore further. Certain lines of inquiry were abandoned. Certain technologies were not expanded. Not because they were impossible, but because they were incompatible with long-term stability under new conditions. Wisdom sometimes appears as restraint. Modern observers often interpret these choices as fear or stagnation. This misreads the warning's role. Warnings do not instruct societies to advance. They instruct them to endure. Endurance requires limits. As the warning deepened, Egypt shifted its relationship with time. Urgency dissolved. Long cycles replaced immediate ambition. Projects were designed to last beyond individual lifetimes. Planning horizons extended not forward in innovation, but outward in preservation. The desert itself embodies this lesson. It does not rush to erase. It buries slowly, evenly, allowing structures to persist in suspension. What lies beneath is not destroyed. It is held. The land collaborates with caution. Even today the warning lingers. Subtle irregularities in the archaeological record are echoes of that ancient calibration. Gaps, silences, abrupt shifts. These are not errors. They are records of attention paid to signals most civilizations ignored until too late. The warning does not accuse. It does not threaten. It simply states that conditions change, and that survival belongs to those who listen early. Egypt listened. It adjusted its posture long before collapse demanded it. As the night stretches deeper, The mind begins to recognize this pattern instinctively. Anxiety softens when one understands that warnings are not predictions of doom, but invitations to adapt. The Earth is not hostile, it is instructive. Here beneath the stars and above buried layers of response, the warning settles into stillness. It has already done its work. What followed was not destruction, but transformation. The land cooled, the systems tightened, knowledge withdrew into safe forms. The warning does not need to be remembered explicitly. Its influence is already woven into stone ritual and silence, and as the desert holds its breath beneath the night sky, one realizes that the most enduring warnings are those that never needed to be shouted. Long before stone learned the weight of hands, the sky was already writing on the earth, not with ink or symbol, but with pressure, gravity, and light. Every star leaves a faint instruction, every cycle a suggestion. In Egypt, this dialogue between above and below never ended. The desert was not empty space. It was a listening surface, a wide instrument tuned to the slow music of the heavens. Stone remembered what the sky repeated. At night, when heat releases its grip, and the sand exhales the day the sky above Egypt becomes unnervingly close, the stars do not sparkle. They burn steadily like fixed thoughts that refuse to drift. Orion leans into the horizon. Sirius rises and sinks with ritual precision. The Milky Way stretches like pale dust across blackness. To stand here is to feel watched not by gods but by geometry. The ancient Egyptians did not separate astronomy from geology. For them, sky and ground were a single breathing system. The same forces that lifted constellations also shaped riverbanks, floodplains, and bedrock. The Nile did not merely flow, it responded. Its flooding mirrored stellar cycles, its retreat timed with celestial alignments. Water obeyed the sky, and stone learned patience from water. Temples were not placed, they were aligned. Each axis traced a conversation between horizon and star, between sunrise and memory. The Great Pyramid does not point north by accident. It locks itself to true north with a precision that feels almost excessive, as if accuracy itself was sacred. This is not architecture as shelter. This is architecture as calibration. Sky becomes stone slowly. Over thousands of years, repeated observation hardens into design. A rising star becomes a corridor. A solstice becomes a wall. A circumpolar constellation becomes a burial promise. The Egyptians built in anticipation, not reaction. Their monuments were prepared for cycles that would outlive them. They were not thinking in lifetimes. They were thinking in returns. The earth answered in kind. Limestone beds settled. Granite cooled and cracked in predictable ways. Fault lines shifted with a rhythm so slow it felt eternal, but nothing was static. Even stone moves when given enough time. Uplift erosion, sedimentation. These were not disasters to the ancient mind. They were punctuation marks in a sentence written by the planet itself. When the sky shifted, the Earth recorded it. Changes in axial tilt precession and orbital rhythm, altered climate patterns. Rain once fell where sand now dominates. Rivers branched and vanished. Lakes formed and dried. Egypt remembers green. Beneath the desert lie fossil shorelines, ancient river channels, pollen trapped in layers of mud. The Earth does not forget, it archives. The stars also drift, though slowly enough to feel fixed to human eyes. Precession causes the pole to wander. North is not eternal. When the pyramids were built, a different star held the role of cosmic anchor. This matters, because it means alignment is not static truth. It is a timestamp. Stone points not just to space, but to a moment in deep time. This is where sky and earth converge most clearly. A temple aligned to a star that no longer rises the same way becomes a fossilized moment of awareness. It tells us when the builders were looking, what they were measuring, what mattered then. Architecture becomes astronomy turned solid. The earth holds the memory of the sky's past positions. Geology teaches that pressure creates structure. Astronomy teaches that repetition creates expectation. Together they form ritual. Floods that arrive predictably become sacred. Stars that return on schedule become gods. When these cycles break, belief fractures. Drought is not just environmental failure, it is cosmological betrayal. The sky failed to keep time. When this happened, Egypt responded not with panic but with adjustment. Calendars were recalibrated, rituals shifted, new alignments appeared. The sky did not change meaning, it changed phase. Earth followed, reorganizing settlements, agriculture and belief. Civilization did not collapse immediately, it bent. Sky and earth together create warning long before catastrophe. A star rising out of season, a flood arriving late, a pattern misaligned by a fraction. These are small signals easy to ignore, but to a civilization watching carefully they are loud. The Egyptians listened. Their monuments are evidence of attention, not arrogance. Modern minds often separate science and spirituality. Ancient minds did not have this luxury. Observation was devotion. Measurement was prayer. To track a star was to participate in cosmic order. To carve stone in alignment was to stabilize reality itself. Architecture was not symbolic, it was corrective. The desert itself amplifies this relationship. At night, temperature drops sharply. Stone contracts. Sand shifts microscopically. The Earth responds physically to the absence of the sun. Gravity feels heavier. Sound travels farther. The sky's withdrawal is felt in the body. Egypt was built in this dialogue between sensation and scale. Above stars burn hydrogen into silence. Below stone absorbs stress and heat. Both operate on timescales that dwarf human urgency. Yet humans position themselves between these systems, acting as translators. They built structures that could speak both languages. That is what temples and pyramids truly are. Interfaces. When we say, as above, so below, we are not speaking metaphorically. We are describing resonance. A pattern in the sky produces a pattern on the ground. A disruption above creates instability below. This is not mysticism. It is systems thinking expressed poetically, because mathematics alone was not enough. The Earth itself is a clock. Stratified layers record time more faithfully than any text. Volcanic ash marks moments. Sediment thickness measures patience. Isotopes decay at fixed rates, whispering the age of things. The Egyptians did not know radioactive decay, but they understood duration. Their sense of time was geological. Sky time and earth time move differently, but they intersect. A comet passes briefly. A glacier advances slowly. Both can reshape belief. Both can reset stories. Egypt lived at this intersection. It watched the sky for change and the earth for response. When both shifted together, something profound occurred. Civilizations that ignore the sky build fragile futures. Civilizations that ignore the earth build illusions. Egypt did neither. Its longevity was not an accident of resources. It was the result of alignment, both literal and conceptual. When alignment failed, when cycles slipped, Egypt adapted by hiding, erasing, or reconfiguring knowledge. This brings us back to the buried. Structures sealed, texts removed, chambers left empty. These are not acts of ignorance, they are acts of timing. Knowledge withheld until the sky and earth return to agreement. Silence becomes a form of waiting. The sky does not rush, neither does the earth, only humans do. Egypt learned to slow itself, to build for recurrence, not permanence, to expect return rather than progress. Sky and earth taught this lesson repeatedly, and stone listened. Tonight, the same stars rise, the same ground cools, gravity holds everything in place, nothing appears urgent. Yet beneath the sand beneath our feet, the earth remembers past alignments, past skies, past responses. It is still waiting, and so is the sky. The return never announces itself with noise. It arrives the way pressure returns to stone after a long release, quietly, inevitably, without emotion. Long before a civilization realizes it is repeating itself, the earth has already adjusted its posture. Rivers begin to wander, winds shift their habits, seasons hesitate. What once felt new starts to feel strangely familiar, not in memory but in the body. The return is sensed before it is understood. In Egypt, return was not failure, it was expectation. Cycles did not imply stagnation, They implied survival. Floods returned, stars returned, dynasties rose and folded back into dust. Each repetition carried difference, but also recognition. The land itself trained its people to notice this. Sediment layers repeat patterns. Drought leaves signatures that echo earlier droughts. The earth remembers what humans forget. When knowledge vanished in Egypt, it rarely disappeared completely. It withdrew. Like groundwater slipping beneath the surface, it remained present, pressurized, waiting for conditions to change. Texts were erased, but methods survived in hands. Names were removed, but alignments remained. Burial practices shifted, but principles endured. The return of knowledge was never dramatic. It seeped back in through practice, architecture, and ritual habit. The sense of déjà vu that accompanies historical collapse is not imagination. It is pattern recognition awakening late. Civilizations repeat behaviors because the constraints repeat first. Climate narrows options. Resources redistribute power. Ideologies harden under stress. The return begins not in culture but in environment. Egypt's long memory allowed it to respond with containment rather than chaos. Geology offers a clear metaphor. After compression, rock rebounds. After burial material resurfaces through uplift and erosion, nothing stays hidden forever. The Earth cycles matter continuously, turning mountains into sand, into stone, into dust again. Human systems mirror this unintentionally. Institutions rise, compact, fracture, and dissolve. The return is erosion thinking. Egypt's most unsettling quality is not what it built, but how often it rebuilt. Temples layered atop temples. Cities over older cities. Foundations reused, reoriented, corrected. Each generation inherited a landscape already shaped by previous returns. This created a cultural patience unfamiliar to modern urgency. The future was not a destination. It was a revisiting. The return also manifests biologically. Genetic memory does not store events, but it preserves responses. Stress reactions echo ancient pressures. Collective behaviors surface under similar threats. Hierarchies reform. Ritual intensifies. Scapegoats appear. These are not moral failures. They are deep time reflexes. Egypt's long duration allowed these reflexes to be studied unconsciously. In moments of stability, Egypt expanded openly. In moments of threat, it folded inward. Knowledge that once circulated became restricted. Crafts turned esoteric. Architecture sealed itself. Silence increased. These were not superstitions. They were containment strategies. When systems destabilize, openness becomes vulnerability. The return teaches restraint. The desert itself enforces this lesson. Wind uncovers what it once buried, then buries it again. A structure exposed today may vanish tomorrow. This instability forces humility. Nothing stays revealed. Archaeology exists because concealment is natural. Egypt understood this intuitively. The land trained its culture to expect disappearance and return. The return also lives in myth. Stories of lost ages, forgotten rulers, vanished islands are not records. They are emotional compressions of repeated loss. Myth is what remains when detail erodes. Egypt's myths speak less of creation than of restoration. Order is always being reassembled from fragments. The return is myth's central motion. In architecture, the return appears as correction. Later builders adjust earlier mistakes. Alignments refined. Proportions recalculated. Structures rebuilt not to innovate, but to restore coherence. The past becomes a reference point rather than a relic. Egypt did not worship ancestors. It consulted them. The most revealing returns are subtle. A ritual revived without explanation. A tool reappearing centuries later with improved precision. A burial practice resurfacing after long absence. These moments confuse linear history. They suggest continuity beneath interruption. Knowledge does not always need writing. It survives through doing. The return is also personal. Standing in the desert at night produces a feeling difficult to describe. Familiarity without memory. Calm mixed with unease. The body recognizes the scale, the slowness, the insignificance. This sensation is not mystical. It is neurological alignment with deep time. Humans evolved under stars on stone within cycles. Egypt amplifies that recognition. Civilizations that deny return pursue novelty relentlessly. They exhaust resources, fragment attention, and accelerate collapse. Egypt endured because it accepted repetition. It built with the expectation that things would fall and rise again. This is why its monuments feel patient rather than triumphant. They wait. The return also explains why so much was hidden rather than destroyed. Destruction ends cycles. Burial preserves them. A sealed chamber anticipates reopening. A buried text assumes a future reader. Egypt trusted return enough to plan for it. This is not secrecy born of fear. It is foresight shaped by geology. When climate shifted and floods failed, Egypt did not abandon the Nile. It adjusted calendars, modified rituals, reinterpreted signs. When dynasties collapsed, stone remained. When belief fractured, architecture held alignment. The return always had anchors. Sky and earth were constant references. When human systems failed, the return challenges modern ideas of progress. It suggests that advancement is not linear accumulation, but rhythmic adaptation. Knowledge gained too early can destabilize. Knowledge released too late can fossilize. Timing matters. Egypt's long survival implies mastery of timing rather than technology alone. In this sense, the return is ethical. It asks restraint. It values patience over speed. It recognizes limits imposed by environment and biology. Egypt did not aim to escape Earth. It aimed to remain compatible with it. The return keeps systems within tolerable bounds. Even now the return is visible. Rising seas echo ancient floods. Desertification mirrors earlier drying phases. Social stratification intensifies under stress. Ritual language resurfaces in secular forms. Technology accelerates, then centralizes. These patterns are not new. They are familiar. Egypt's buried knowledge may resurface not because we seek it, but because conditions demand it. When systems strain, old solutions become relevant again. Passive cooling, stone mass, astronomical calibration, resource frugality. These are not romantic ideas. They are responses proven by repetition. The return does not guarantee wisdom. It only offers opportunity. Egypt experienced both resilience and collapse. Its lessons were not always heeded even then, but its duration provides perspective unavailable to short-lived cultures. It teaches that survival depends on alignment, not dominance. As sand shifts and excavations continue, fragments emerge. Not full stories, but hints. Techniques without manuals, alignments without names, structures without context. These fragments are enough. They suggest continuity beneath erasure. They imply that return is ongoing. The most important realization is this. The return is not about going backward. It is about remembering how to move slowly, how to listen to land, how to read sky, how to hide knowledge until it can be carried safely. Egypt mastered this art imperfectly but persistently. Nothing beneath the sand is truly gone. It is paused, waiting for conditions to soften, waiting for attention to slow, waiting for urgency to fade. The return happens when patience outlasts forgetting, and it always does. In the end, reflection is not an act of looking backward. It is an act of settling. Like sediment falling through still water, understanding descends only when movement slows enough to allow it. Egypt's deepest lesson does not live in its monuments or its mysteries, but in the way time itself seems to soften around them. Nothing here insists. Everything waits. What lies beneath the sand is not merely an older world, it is an older pace, a way of existing that did not confuse speed with progress or accumulation with meaning. The stones do not argue, they rest. In their stillness, they remind us that endurance is quieter than ambition and far more patient. Across this journey, we traced patterns, silences, anomalies, and returns. We followed evidence that behaved like geology rather than narrative. Each chapter peeled back a layer not to reveal answers but to remove urgency. Egypt does not reward those who rush to conclusions. It teaches by erosion, by repetition, by long exposure. Reflection begins when the need to explain dissolves, when curiosity relaxes into attention, when the mind stops demanding revelation and allows resonance instead. This is where Egypt speaks most clearly, not through decoded secrets, but through atmosphere, weight alignment, and absence. The land itself invites this shift. Desert nights quiet the nervous system, the temperature drop signals release, muscles loosen, breath deepens. The body enters a rhythm older than thought. In this state, the difference between past and present thins. Memory feels less like recall and more like recognition. What we encountered beneath the sands was not a singular lost civilization, but a layered continuity of adaptation. Worlds did not vanish. They folded. Knowledge did not disappear. It withdrew. Each collapse left behind tools, instincts, and alignments, waiting for conditions to change again. This reframes loss. What seemed erased becomes dormant. What appeared destroyed becomes redistributed. Egypt teaches that disappearance is often just a change of state. Like water becoming vapor, like stone becoming sand, nothing essential is wasted. Reflection also reveals restraint as intelligence. The decision to hide knowledge, to seal chambers, to erase inscriptions was not always oppression or fear. Sometimes it was protection. Knowledge carries weight. Released without context, it destabilizes. Egypt understood this intuitively. Modern culture often equates openness with virtue, but geology teaches otherwise. Exposure accelerates decay. Layers preserve by limiting access. Fossils survive because they are buried. Ice cores remember because they are sealed. The earth protects its memory through containment. Egypt mirrored this logic culturally. Its most delicate understandings were insulated from misuse. When danger passed, fragments resurfaced. When danger returned, silence followed. This oscillation preserved continuity across millennia. Reflection also humbles the observer. Standing before structures aligned to stars that no longer occupy the same sky dissolves human centrality. These builders were not speaking to us. They were speaking to cycles. We are incidental witnesses, not intended recipients. This realization softens interpretation. We stop asking what Egypt wanted to tell us and begin asking what Egypt needed to survive. The answers become less dramatic but more instructive. Balance, timing, alignment, patience. The Earth enforces these lessons without apology. Climate shifts ignore ideology. Erosion disregards belief. Gravity does not negotiate. Egypt survived by respecting these constants rather than resisting them. Its spirituality was practical. Its science was embodied. Reflection also reframes mystery. Mystery is not a failure of knowledge. It is a feature of long systems interacting with short minds. Not everything is meant to be resolved within a single era. Some questions exist to stretch attention rather than satisfy it. Egypt's unresolved anomalies function this way. They slow interpretation, they prevent closure, they keep inquiry alive without allowing it to become rigid. In this sense, mystery is not absence, it is space. As listeners, as observers, as travellers through deep time, we are invited not to solve Egypt but to synchronize with it, to allow its tempo to recalibrate our own. To recognise that some truths arrive not as conclusions but as calm. Reflection also reveals how much modern anxiety stems from disconnection from cycles. Linear time creates pressure, deadlines compress awareness. Everything feels urgent, final, irreversible. Egypt offers an alternative perception, time as recurrence, change as modulation rather than rupture. This perspective does not deny loss, it contextualizes it. Floods destroy villages but replenish soil. Dynasties fall but cultural memory persists. Individuals die but patterns continue. Meaning migrates rather than ends. At the personal level, this insight is quietly stabilizing. It suggests that confusion is temporary, that periods of contraction precede expansion, that silence often signals preparation. The earth breathes, so do societies, so do individuals. Reflection, therefore, becomes acceptance, not resignation. Acceptance of limits, acceptance of scale, acceptance of cycles beyond control. This acceptance is not passive, It informs wiser action by reducing panic. Egypt did not attempt to escape Earth's rhythms. It aligned with them. Its architecture anchored to stars. Its agriculture obeyed floods. Its rituals tracked seasons. Its knowledge systems mirrored geology. In this alignment lies its longevity. Not perfection, not moral superiority, but compatibility. Systems that remain compatible with their environment endure longer than those that seek dominance. Reflection also clarifies why Egypt continues to draw attention. Not because it holds secret technologies or lost powers, but because it models endurance in a world that fears collapse. Its ruins are calm in a way that modern structures are not. They do not rush us. They wait. The sand itself participates in this lesson. It covers and uncovers impartially. It does not preserve to honour nor erase to punish. It responds to wind, gravity, and time. Human meaning attaches itself temporarily, then releases. What remains after this journey is not a list of conclusions, but a posture, a slower gaze, a softened expectation, a willingness to let understanding arrive gradually or not at all. This posture is the true inheritance beneath the sands, not artifacts, not diagrams, but a way of being with time, a way of listening to land and sky without insisting on mastery. As the narrative closes, there is no final revelation to announce, only a return to stillness, the same stillness that opened this journey, the same stillness that allowed Egypt to endure. The desert at night holds everything lightly. Stone cools, stars continue their indifferent arcs, wind redraws the surface. Beneath it all, a memory persists without urgency. And so as attention loosens and thought slows, reflection becomes rest. The mind releases the need to extract meaning. It allows meaning to settle like dust. What lies beneath the sands of Egypt is not waiting to be uncovered by force. It waits for quiet, for patience, for the willingness to meet time on its own scale. In that meeting, something shifts, not in the past, in the listener, and that is enough. And in that quiet shift, something ancient resumes its motion. Not a secret unlocking, not a door opening, but a subtle reorientation of attention. The mind stops pressing forward and begins to settle downward like sand finding its own level after disturbance. This is how deep time is felt, not as vastness, but as steadiness. The body understands this before language does. Heartbeat slows, breath lengthens, muscles release their vigilance. In this softened state, reflection becomes embodied rather than conceptual. One does not think about Egypt. One rests inside the same conditions that shaped it. Heat surrendered to night. Silence stretching without demand. Stone holding warmth, then letting it go. Here acceptance becomes almost geological. It does not argue with what has been lost or hidden. It allows absence to be part of structure. Just as erosion shapes mountains without intent, forgetting shapes cultures without malice. What endures is what adapts to this process, not what resists it. Egypt endures in this way, not as a puzzle to be solved, but as a rhythm to be felt. Its deepest continuity lies not beneath monuments, but within the human capacity to slow down enough to notice cycles larger than a single life. In that noticing, urgency dissolves. And as awareness drifts gently back toward rest, the lesson remains unspoken but intact. Time is not chasing us, it is carrying us. The sand knows this, the stone knows this. Tonight, if nothing else, so do you. We've reached the edge of tonight's journey, traveller. The long path we followed has slowly narrowed like a river easing into still water. Nothing more needs to be uncovered now. The ground beneath you is steady, ancient and patient, and it asks nothing of you except rest. You've moved through thousands of words, through layers of stone and silence, through echoes of forgotten worlds. There is no need to hold on to them. You do not need to remember names, patterns, or conclusions. What mattered has already settled quietly into the deeper currents of your mind where understanding does not need language. The earth does not remember by counting. It remembers by pressure, by repetition, by time allowed to pass without resistance. In the same way, this story does not ask to be recalled. It has done its work simply by being present by accompanying you to this softer threshold where thought loosens its grip. In the end, traveller, it is all right to not understand. Mystery does not diminish meaning, it protects it. Just as sand preserves what lies beneath by covering it gently, not knowing can be a form of peace. You are not required to solve what is older than certainty itself. Let gravity hold you. Let the questions fade. Allow your body to sink into its own weight, supported without effort. Breath slows, muscles release. The long tension of seeking can finally be set down like a tool no longer needed. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only observed. Tonight the universe whispers again. Sleep, traveller, the cosmos will keep watch.